Okay, so welcome back, everybody. So we've seen the MACOS bifocal display, so we can see how that works. Now, for different sorts of distortion, which maintain interest and make things easier to understand. Okay, the London tube map is famous for many reasons, and I think we've all seen it. We're all more or less familiar with the thing. Okay, and you think, okay, that is the tube map. That is the map of London. That's how most people envisage London unless they live there. And even those who live there, I think, probably imagine significant chunks of it based on that. And okay, so that's what we see. That's our mental map of what's going on. That's the reality. Okay, so what you've got there is a very significant spatial distortion. Okay, so if we look here, okay, we've got these lines coming way out. Okay, and if we go back here, what's happened? Right, they've got really compressed. So these places look much nearer than they are. So what it's doing is, if you like, you could see this London tube map as some sort of bifocal display which focuses on central London. Okay, so central London is hugely magnified and it declines very steeply. Yeah, so it compresses the space. So it makes London seem smaller and more compact than it is. It makes the centre seem larger than it is. Okay, so again, if your mental map of London is based on this, what you don't realise is that by the time you get down here, some of these tube stations are about 50 metres apart. And it's quicker to walk from one to the other than think about going any other way. Okay, so there's the geographically accurate tube map. If we go back, look at the history of this for a minute, very early tube maps. So this is really when the individual lines first became integrated into the notion of a tube system, 1909. Okay, it's geographically accurate. You can see what's going on. It looks very different now. By the time we get to 1932, we've had more lines built. It's starting to look a bit spaghetti-like. Okay, then Beck, who was actually by trade, he was a London Underground truss person. By training, he was an electrical engineer. So what he brought to it was the notion of circuit diagrams where all lines are either vertical, horizontal, or at 45 degrees. And he said, can we make the tube map easier to understand by putting it onto this sort of grid? And as we all know, it was hugely successful and it's been copied elsewhere. Okay, so Berlin, you can see something very similar. And I could have put other cities up too. Okay, so our visual scaling, visual information seeking, what we have is a set, we can divide into a set of 7 tasks. So if you like, this is summarizing what we've seen so far. So in this lecture, we can say Schneiderman's main tasks. So overview. So how do we get an overview of the collection of our data, whether that's spatial, any other form, whatever? How do we get the overview of it? How can we zoom in on items of interest? How can we filter out the stuff we're not interested in? How can we find the bits that we are interested in? How can we see relationships between the items? How can we have, now, what we've not seen in any of the examples so far is how can we have a history? So if we're doing exploratory stuff, what we very much like to do is to be able to say, do. Okay, that's not very interesting, or I want to backtrack and start off another branch. At the moment, the best we can do is do. Okay, no, undo until we get to whatever the undo limit is, and restart. Okay, so we can't say, oh, look, I'll save that one and go again. Now, part of that is the mechanisms can be a bit complex, and it can be difficult to make those things really easy to use. But here's an important one. So history, and then extract to allow sub-collections and queries to be extracted. So that is something that we've seen in the big data collections is actually really quite easy to do now. That works a lot better. Okay, so it says, we'll give you something simple and you can extract what you want. Okay, so a couple of references for it. So the Schneiderman paper, and then the homepage for the Information is Beautiful website, which is actually very good for all sorts of ideas. I would recommend really that for the project, it's well worth spending half an hour trawling around there, just having a look to see, because for ideas for doing neat stuff, it's really good. Okay, now, final slide of this lecture, official statistics. As I've come through, I've mentioned various official statistics, and I know that we've had quite a lot of good projects in the past which have used or made extensive use of official statistics. So what I've given for each of these is the homepage, and where there's an API, I've given the API link. Okay, and the reason for this is because by the time we get to Easter, so in 4 weeks' time, we will have looked at this stuff, and you should be in a position where you can say, oh, I know what, I've got all my little graphs on screen, and I'm going to pick them up, and I'm going to feed them, not from something which I've hardwired into my JavaScript or from something like that. I'm going to go to the server. It might be the OECD server or whatever, and I am going to pull the data live. Oh, you think, oh, whoa, but that's all right. It will work. It will work well. Had a look at these, and a lot of these APIs are really nice and simple. Okay, so hence the APIs, and I think for several people as well, these may well have additional uses beyond the project, but certainly I'd expect those to be useful for the project. Okay, so I'll end there and wait for that to give me back my screen. Okay, so what I will do now is I'll stop sharing the screen for a minute, and I will talk about, yes, there is a delay. I'm not sure why it is. I'm seeing that big delay as well, so I don't know. Right, so I'll stop sharing the screen for a minute. Okay. I've had a couple of emails in the week about project, and a question in the break about the essay. I should an email in the week about the essay as well. So before I talk a little bit about CSS, which is the additional bit for today's lab, then I recommend everybody have a look at the material under the assignment briefs. So I can probably find it. So on Blackboard, what we have is assignment briefs, and it has assignment 1 timed essay and assignment 2 visualization project. So for timed essay, I've got the essay brief, I've got a PDF of the references, I've got, for those who would find it helpful, I've got the bib file and the text file that I use to generate that PDF. I've got the scope document on hints for writing reports, which some people may find useful, and I've got the an example. So that example is an essay from a previous year. I've redacted all the references. So what you can see there is an example of a good essay from the previous year. I wouldn't say it's probably not the best in class, but a good one. If I said that's an essay in the top quartile of the cohort. Okay. And that was done in 2 hours under examination conditions. So you've got an extra hour, and you've got actually more access to resources, because under examination conditions, you'd be allowed to bring in 1 sheet of paper with notes on, and you could have a file to upload with your bibliography and a file to upload with your diagrams. Okay, and 2 hours with people looking at you. So 3 hours in a 24-hour period is a significant relaxation of that. Okay, so I've had questions about word limits, page limits. No, it's time. Okay, you have a text box. You open the text box, the timer starts, it will shut off in 3 hours. You can't stop and restart, you can't have a second go. You have to finish before the end of the 24-hour period. Okay, so those are the rules on it. And we did it last year, it worked fine, no problems. So it should be quite easy. Okay, so hopefully that will answer your questions about that, but I'm very happy to take further questions in the lab. Okay, so the second thing, visualization project. For that, I have the assignment itself and a template of the sort of structure that you might want for the flyer. Okay, there's a little bit of documentation that goes with it. Right. Okay, so the topic of the essay is in the assignment brief. It's given. This is what we did last week. Okay. So, yeah. It's about evaluation and visualization. Yes. So if you read the assignment brief, and if it's still not clear, no, it has to be done on Blackboard with the text box. There is no other alternative way of doing this. Okay.
And you need the diptych. So just write it.
Okay. So I don't care how the references, how the bibliography is presented. I put the bibtech up because for a lot of people this may well be easier. Okay. So no, the essay writing will not take place in the lab. It's an online. There will be 24 hours. It will be open for 24 hours. Okay, and within that time, you have 3 hours to complete it. Okay. Yes. Again, I think if you look at the marking criteria, if you add your own references, then that's fine. If you think you're going to write a better essay without looking at any of my references, good luck. You might be able to, but you're setting yourself a much more difficult task, because the selection of things I provided is the selection which I think is best placed to get you started and point in a position to do good work on this as quickly as possible. So if you add to it, that's fine. And I think if you look at the marking criteria, the marking sheet at the end of the assignment, you'll see that if you supplement what I've given you with your own, then there are some extra marks for it. But you can do a very good essay based on what I've given you. Okay, so you don't have to go and find extra stuff, but I think for a lot of people you might think, oh yes, it would be quite nice if I did, or I think I've got a gap here, something like that. Okay, so hopefully that's answered the questions there. If there are more, we can deal with them in the lab. Right, so what I want to talk about for the next part of this is okay, so hopefully you can now see a slide saying cascading style sheets. If that's not visible, somebody can say something quickly, but hopefully. Right, so what I want to do in these few slides is to talk about why CSS, what it does, and to show the bits of CSS that we can use to help with some basic improving the appearance. So basic formatting. We will not be covering the CSS box model and positioning. We're saving that for next week. Okay, we've got enough to go at this week without that one. Okay, so why did the World Wide Web Commission think that we needed something called CSS? Well, it starts from the observation that different devices display pages differently, and that different sorts of device need different displays. So phones, tablets, and small devices need different displays from big devices. When we say big devices, well, you know, what does big mean? Does it mean some ultra-wide monitor with 5,000 pixels in one direction and feet long and so on, or does it mean something, the sort of thing we find in the labs? So all sorts of things, different manufacturers and so on. So we need ways of trying to standardize things there and to allow us to tailor our displays to different devices. And if we want to print, then printers may well need something different. Okay, now, that's fine. That's what the problem is. And what we want to do is to make sure that in doing that, there is a really clean separation of content from display instructions. If we've got a clean separation of content from display instructions, we can reuse the content with different sets of display instructions. If we've got content and display instructions mixed up together, it's very difficult to repurpose the content. Or if we're going to, instead of just rewriting some display instructions, we have to go and edit the content and find all this, and we have to do that for every time. Whereas if we have separate display instructions, we just have to worry about those. So this is where cascading style sheets comes from. It says we are going to have multiple definitions of things. Okay, and we will have a priority order for these things. Now, we've seen in the lab exercises the notion that when we're listing the JavaScript libraries that we're including, we have to list them in the right order, otherwise things don't work, because later things are looking at things that should be later are looking for things which aren't there, so the whole thing stops working. Now, cascading style sheets uses a similar idea. So it says there is a priority order, right? So the default priority is whatever the browser gives you, and that's what we've been using. Okay. The next level is an external style sheet. So this is a style sheet, it'll be called lab3.css or something, rather like the JavaScript files we've been working with. Okay, so it's very similar. And the next level of priority down, an internal style sheet, and that's something, a set of CSS rules in the head tag. Okay, and then inline style overrides everything else, and that is, so style equals bit of an HTML element. Okay, so we know we've got some priorities, and later ones override earlier ones. So we'll be able to exploit that. Now, what is CSS? CSS, okay, it comes in style sheets, and style sheets are made up of rules. The rule has got three parts in it: a selector, a property, and a value. So the selector says, what are we going to work on? So at the top level, a selector might be body. Okay, so if you have a selector that works on body, it says everything in body, in the body of the HTML file, is subject to this rule. Okay, bits can then overwrite it. Okay, and so that's the scope of the rule, the parts of the document affected. The property, what are we setting? So are we setting the font style, the font size, the font weight, the color, all sorts of things we can set. And what is the value? Okay, so we might be saying we want our font style to be a sans serif. So you've seen the default font style that you get is a sort of Times type. It's got little twiddly bits on the end, and if we want to change it, then we specify something else. Okay, we can make our rules apply to all media or just certain types. We can have rules which, if we're looking on a small screen, we have one rule. If we're on a big screen, we have a different rule. So how do we do that? Okay, we'll look at that in a minute. So here we go. If we want to have different types, what we can say is here we've got a link to a style sheet of type CSS. It applies to all media, and that's the file name. Okay. We can have another style sheet which says, okay, if our media type is handheld, so if the browser we're looking at reports to the server that it is a handheld device, so a phone, then these rules will apply. Okay, so if we need different rules for different types of devices, we can have them. What we'll see as we explore bits of CSS, so we can make, or CSS is the thing which makes our designs, allows our designs to be responsive. Okay, so within a style sheet, so we can have different style sheets. So what a later style sheet can override parts or the whole of an earlier style sheet rule. Okay, what we could say is if we want certain rules to be applied to and change rules for different things. Okay, so if we can have a media directive within our style file. We can say, okay, if we've got handheld, the body should have a font size which is small. So now this is a relative font size, so it's what the browser thinks as is one size below normal, and it should be whatever the browser thinks the local sans serif font is. If it's on screen, the font size of the body should be normal. Okay, so we can do, there's all sorts of ways we can specialize the types of device that we're using, that we're looking at. And if our rules are outside a media construct, which is the normal case, then they apply to all media. So we've seen that we can make our CSS rules work differently from different types of device. This is good. So if you like, that's the first bit out of the way. Right, let's have a look at what a rule actually looks like. Right, so we've got a selector. Now it can have a lot of one or more property value pairs. Okay, so what this is saying is if we've got an H1 tag, a header 1 tag, that should be done with Helvetica. If you haven't got Helvetica, then whatever the local sans serif font is, and it should be blue. Okay, so we're saying in one rule, make it Helvetica or sans serif if you haven't got Helvetica, and make it color blue. That's fine. We can. So, what are the things we can do? So, if we've got class selectors, so here we've got body. So the biggest use we'll have for rules that affect the body are to, as we'll see next week, to get rid of default margins and padding, because they get in the way of calculating how big things should be when we're doing boxes. And we might want to say our default is going to be a sans serif font, something like that. We tend not to do that much there, but we just say, okay, this is what we want everything to be, unless we have specific reason for it not to be. Okay, so we might have some divs, which are of the class menu. So this is where you've got div, class equals menu, ID equals whatever. Okay, so and so if we've got a class of things like that, we can say, all right, for that group of things, we want to do this. And if we've got a hash, okay, so this says somewhere we've got something which is has got ID equals banner, and whatever that thing is will be affected by a rule that has hash banner in it. Now you might think, oh, this looks a bit like the selectors we've seen and we've been using in our JavaScript. Yes, they are. This is not accidental. It reduces the amount of stuff you have to learn and remember. So that's good. So we have class selectors, and the other thing is we can have generic selectors. So we can have selectors which work just on, or can work on anything, and we just have to associate the selector with the thing that we want to operate on. Okay, so we can have we'll call it a party rule. Okay, so generic, anything with class equals party, and it doesn't matter whether it's a div, a paragraph, an H1, an H4, or anything else, we can make it look like this. So anything which has got class equals party on it, we are going to have it with the font family as Rosewood Standard, or whatever your local cursive font is, and we are going to make it fuchsia. Now, why would you want to do this? Good question, but it just shows you can. Okay, now you notice here that you've got a font name with a space in it. And if you've got a space in it, it has to have some quotes around it. Otherwise, the CSS parser doesn't know that Rosewood Standard is a font name. It thinks the font name is Rosewood, and then it's looking for a keyword standard, and it says, I don't know what's going on here. I'm stopping. Okay, and it stops silent. It just says, okay, I can't make sense of this rule, so I'll go default to whatever the other rule is that I happen to use. Okay, so we've seen an example of what an external style sheet definition looks like. Now, if we have an internal style sheet, we say style type equals CSS. So we've got a style tag, an end style tag, and in the middle we have some rules. Okay. So our external style sheet link, okay, like that. It's fine, and that contains a list of rules, and it's the same as, if I, sorry, what you've got here in between the style and end style tags is the same as what you've got in the external style sheet. Okay, right. So we want to talk about sizes of things. We can have all sorts of ways in HTML of defining sizes, right? So I'll do this and then we'll talk about why sizes matter a bit. So you can have absolute units, so 12-point font, 34 pixels, border 2.5 millimeters and so on, or 2 pixels or whatever it happens to be. We can have a max width, sorry, max width should be max dash width. Let me just correct that error on screen while we go. Right. Okay. Back we come. Right. Okay. So, maximum width. We can have relative units. So M's and X's are really helpful to us where we've got text, because an M is the width of the lowercase m in the current font and size. And the X is the height of a lowercase x in the current font and size. So if, as we're changing sizes of things, those remain constant. So if you've got, so that basically, as we change sizes, then they don't break. So the proportions, the appearance looks the same. Now, what we should do is, if we can avoid absolute units, we should. So I think, oh yeah, look, yeah, we want a 12-point font here. Well, the 12-point font, yeah, okay, it might look great on your display. It might be tiny on some mega display that somebody else has got, and it might be horribly clunky on some phone. If we say size normal, then whatever the normal size, the default size is for that device will be used. Okay, so if you think about using, and you can say large, extra large, small, extra small, and so on. Okay, so you can have different font sizes, but by saying, are they bigger or smaller, or are they normal, then it means that as you change things, they don't break. Okay, and again, you think about accessibility, somebody with really poor eyesight wants to make their normal font about 28 point so they can actually read it, and you specified yours to be 12 point. Oh, can't change that. So sizes matter. Okay, right. Okay, I think I've covered that, so I won't say any more. Now, let's have a look at some rules here. All right, so here we got a rule for, and this could be a full-blown style sheet. Okay, so it says, right, we will make the body to have a large font size by default, so everything in relation to that will be displayed large and we don't have to worry about it. If we wanted to change that later on, we could. We only have to make one change. Okay, we're going to make it, our header ones are going to be dark blue. They're going to be Helvetica or whatever the local sans serif is. So you notice the semicolon and the comma to separate the list of, so that one, and if we haven't got it, that one. Right, okay, we want our header. We've got somewhere we've got we've got the header type of tag. We want that to be 250% of whatever our default is, and we want it to be orange. Okay, we're also going to have something, a way of doing an odd format for a paragraph. We're going to make it current Comic Sans or whatever the local cursive is. We're going to right align it, we're going to make it orange, and we are going to give it a line background color. I do not recommend doing this except as an experiment to show that you can do it. It looks horrid. Okay, so our generic selectors, again, it doesn't matter what we call them, right? But it helps if we have names that are meaningful to us. Okay, so calling a generic selector Mary really isn't very helpful because it doesn't tell us anything useful about it at all. Calling it showy is vaguely useful because it's, oh yeah, we're aiming for that sort of effect. Right, okay, am I going to talk about, no, I don't really want to talk about boxes. Okay, so I'll leave talking about boxes until next week. Right, okay, so useful bits of CSS for us. So font family, font size, font style, font weight, okay, text alignment, text decoration. Again, text decoration, I'll tell you now, I'm not a fan of it because underlining it tends to look clunky. If you think of old-fashioned web pages where all links were underlined, at the time it was a useful convention. If you want to show something crossed out, that can be interesting. Blinking is horribly distracting. So yeah, text indentation, again, vertical alignment if we need it. Color, we talked a lot about colors. You've got the color sheet, which is fine. Background color, background image. Again, I would be wary about using background images because they tend to get in the way of the text. Okay, so you've got stuff going on in the background and text overlaid, and it's very easy for that background image to get in the way of the text. Okay, right, there's huge amounts else. Right, so what I want to do is, okay, so when are we going to use what? So we should never use inline. Okay, never use inline styles because they are very difficult to find if you want to repurpose your content for something else. So inline styles break all the good rules about separating content from display. So the number of times you should use that ever is 0. Internal style sheets, if you're doing development testing, it's easier, that's fine. But in most modern environments, it doesn't make much difference. And if we've got some really special cases where we want to override our normal styles. Okay. Yeah, it might be that if you've got something very simple with 2 rules and that's it, stick it as an internal sheet, it'll be fine. Your default should be an external style sheet. It's easy to maintain, it's easy to change, it's easy to share it with other people. So again, if we're thinking about doing this in a corporate environment, we may well say, okay, look, we've put together this really good visualization and we've got some basic rules for how it should look and so on. But then, okay, we've got the corporate branding people and they want to apply all the corporate branding stuff. So let's import their style sheet and it'll all work. We don't have to worry about it. Or our corporate branding's changed, right, let's just grab their new style sheet and include it. Whereas if we've done it otherwise, corporate branding's just changed the rules, we've got to go through and find everything and change it by hand. Now, would you rather change a link or go through every page and find every instance? You know what? We would definitely take let's just change the file. So external style sheets make everyone's lives easier. Right, so this is a very, very basic gallop through some little bits, the basics of CSS, just enough to let you get started without complicating life too much for the lab. Now, what I would recommend, I think, is actually the Mozilla, the tutorial. That's my feeling is that the Mozilla descriptions of anything to do with web are some of the best around. Okay, they tend to come about 6th or 7th in the list because W3, when you search for anything, W3 Schools comes top of the list. Now, W3 Schools have got better, but they're still not terribly good. They used to be riddled with errors. There are far fewer errors now, but I think I would always recommend, search down the list and you'll always find the Mozilla one somewhere. Okay, and they inevitably tend to be better as far as I'm concerned. Okay, right, so I am going to come out of that. Okay. I am going to stop sharing. I'm going to